So 45 Celsius idle, it's quite nice when it comes to compact design. So overall we're using a 2 terabyte image at this moment. So this is quite old. It's an i5 second generation 2520M CPU. We do have a core count of 4. So the reason I purchased this particular model is I was really curious about like what can we do when it comes to, let's say, an i5, but really, let's say, an old version. Is it any good, or is it something we should like avoid, or is maybe fun for some overall general emulation? Think about Sega Saturn, Dreamcast and all that kind of stuff. But the question of course remains, what can we actually play? And that's what I'm going to be checking out today. Would not be surprised that we do have a little bit better overall emulation that I've been testing with some really old dual cores. So we have more cores, we have a little bit more power, so but still prehistoric tech. So I would not expect to have PlayStation 3 up and running and many newer generation devices. But just fun to see what we can actually do with such an old, but also in my case, an old and very cheap mini PC. The first system I wanted to check out is the Panasonic 3DO. We have been seeing a couple of them on, let's say, some cheaper game boxes, but most of them had like a lot of issues. So it's kind of cool to see that we can actually boot it up, and you can already see from the loading times that this is quite a big improvement over, let's say, the other mini PCs I've reviewed that I've paid with, let's say, not a lot of money, but also very old specs. Love that they put this in the 4:3 aspect ratio. We had a minor hiccup over there to 55, but the general emulation performance is absolutely great. That is no problem whatsoever. So I'm very happy to see that we can actually finally play some Panasonic 3DO and on a very cheap way. Next up, some Thomas Wave with a minor hiccup going on, but maybe I can do a little bit of tweaking. I also need to look if all of the files are implemented when it comes to BIOS files. But so far out of the box with an older Batocera, I need to say that this seems to be running quite nice on this older i5. So I do wonder like how many of these older i5s can people find. It also depends what kind of region you're watching this from. US, UK, Germany, or a lot of parts of the world. It's all depending. What I already mentioned before, like I have not a lot of, let's say, expensive mini PC options, but also when it comes to cheap ones, there we can find so many cool things. But when it comes to getting into the game, Batocera with some Thomas Wave, this seems to be running just fine. So that is great. We have been testing a lot of MAME games. If you want to play MAME games, there are a lot of different cheap options out there. I think even that like $90 sticks can actually play those like MAME games without any problem. But where we're going to be having a lot of challenge is of course with Killer Instinct and Tekken MAME. So let's move through those and let's see how they will run on this prehistoric i5 model. And yep, we can actually play some Killer Instinct 2 and number 1 without any problem on this mini PC. Yeah, and that is one of those very cool, appealing things. I can still remember reviewing those, let's say, cheap Chinese, let's say, PCs that are running like a dual core that even had the option to play this. And one of the first time I've actually played an emulation with Killer Instinct, it was on the Xbox Classic. However, it's absolutely awesome to see that we can just play these games. And I think this is one of the more appealing things of just getting a Batocera with a mini PC. Even is it like a prehistoric model, we can just play these games that we can do on a very cheap, let's say, game box or game stick. Moving on to some MAME of Tekken, just wanted to see how that actually runs, but you can just see it runs without any problem whatsoever. Did hear some minor hiccups, nothing really annoying when it comes to starting up the game, but beside that, but another system I just wanted to check, or at least like the MAME again, but also we're going to be checking out some old school games like Tekken Tag. And the reason why, because this is really demanding compared with the Tekken 1, 2 and 3 series. I've been checking this game on, let's say, older Super Console X devices, and they all had like issues, particularly with this game. But even this older prehistoric i5 has no problems whatsoever. Well, let's switch to another Batocera image, a little bit newer, with a simple reason for, let's say, overall compatibility. So, but when it comes to, let's say upscaling, that is one of the parts that I'm really curious about, particularly when it comes to N64 and stuff like that. Will it be even possible I think PlayStation 1 will be maybe N64, but let's get also into some Sega Saturn, Sega Dreamcast, and etc. 720p with some Sega Dreamcast Dead Alive 2, of course, to see if we can get some overall good performance. And to my surprise, this older i5 runs it without any problem. So let's get this guy in the wall to give a little bit of more crazy thing going on. No, that was not the stuff I wanted to do. And the reason why, because sometimes with a lot of like rendering, that we see in drop, but it is not the case over here. So with Dreamcast emulation, it's going to be absolutely a blast to the past. But it's kind of interesting to see that the Sega Saturn struggles with this chipset itself, with having 50 plus frames per second. So there's a little bit of a disappointment. So I'm not even going to using any upscaling whatsoever. So what you see is actually what you're getting on native resolution, where some of the games are a little bit more demanding. Two-dimensional games will run better. We can also switch between emulators. But getting from the beginning and through the game, you can see it stutters all the time. But so far, this is not the way how you want to experience the old school Sega Saturn. And I'm kind of not surprised, because it's a quite difficult emulator to actually use, and now we're using a very old, let's say, CPU. And again, we can do tweaking, for example, going back to the main menu, what we can actually do, going to advanced game options, mess around with this. So let's say we're going to be using the Yaban Shishiro, go back, boot it up again. That is one of those ways you can actually try and see if you can get overall better performance. But it doesn't even boot up. Well, let's start off with the PlayStation. I just wanted to see, can we do a little bit of upscaling over here? I did notice some hiccups. I'm running now on 1080p random resolution, so this is clear to me that if you want to have perfect emulation, we need to have like set to 720p. So we need to do a little bit of a lowering down. So this is one of those limitations, just want to showcase. So where we can actually play the games, and of course two-dimensional games will be less demanding. But you can see that it struggles keeping up with the emulator, the i5 chipset in the inside. So it's unfortunate, but 1080p is just way too much for this tiny little machine. Yes, indeed, let's get ready for the next battle. Moving on to some PlayStation 2 emulation native, because yeah, we didn't have great emulation performance with PlayStation 1 and upscaling. And the PlayStation 2 is so much more difficult, and it does have a lot of struggles. Yeah, you know, maybe with a couple of games are not demanding, we do have some overall emulation performance that is playable, but yeah, this i5 is just too much when it comes to the PlayStation 2 emulation, and that is quite unfortunate, because I love the PlayStation 2 system itself. Where PlayStation 3 is something we just instantly skip, simple because this is not going to be working fine. We do have the option to play some PlayStation Portable now on 1080p rendering resolution. And I'm not even afraid to scale it up a little bit. However, we need to have like an overall stable frame rate. I'm already glad that we can actually play the PlayStation Portable on higher resolution, because that's something we couldn't do before with many devices, particularly the cheap game boxes. So that's great to see that we do have like the option now to upscale even on a lower end CPU. And yep, it can run Doom, of course. It's more like a joke, simply because this can be played on many devices now. However, it's kind of cool to play all these old school classic ones. And the reason I'm always showing Doom, not only because it doesn't run Doom, I just love Doom. I love the soundtracks, particularly this one. It's kind of cool to play this with an analog stick, by the way. It's very comfy. Whoa, 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 yeah. Next up, some N64. I just do a little bit of an upscaling of 720p. So Cruising the USA is a quite difficult game to actually emulate on cheap boxes, but let's see how far we can push it with this older i5. So far, so good. You can see that it runs on 26.55 frames per second. That's kind of weird. There we go, 30. Thank you. So when it comes to emulation, I'm quite surprised actually how great this works and how it looks, because 720p is absolutely so much better than native resolution when everything looks less pixelated, blurry, and etc. And to be honest, this is one of the reasons why I love to play on the emulator sometimes than my original N64 console. However, maybe we can do some tweaking depending on what kind of game you want to play. But let's move on to some other stuff and see how that actually runs. But also, Dolphin is going to be pushing this thing to the limit. I did notice some great performance on some lower-end chips in the past. So one of the things you can do is actually let it run for some time. And you can see, going through the game, it's getting slowly better on native resolution. So PlayStation 2 was a little bit too much for the CPU to handle, where GameCube also have a little bit of a problem. But let's get into some gaming to see how we can actually play and how it actually runs. So let's get into some gaming of the F-Zero GX. And the simple reason because we do have like this instability in the overall emulation, where this intro started quite good. Now we do have a lot of problems when it comes to that. Alright, so let's start up. Let's see if it's getting better throughout the game. No, it's the same situation when think with PlayStation 2, where we can actually play the game but with a lot of slowdowns. The CPU is just too old to have PlayStation 2, GameCube, the same kind of era of emulation when it comes to that. But what we can actually conclude is when it comes to emulation with Batocera and a PC, we do have so many improvements when it comes to different kind of systems. We can even do some upscaling with some devices. But in the end, 8-bit, 16-bit, stuff like that, that runs perfectly on this. So that's the reason I just wanted to do in-depth about more of the more demanding devices. PlayStation 2, GameCube, there are like absolutely the limitations of this old chipset. I think if you find this mini PC for not a lot of money, think about maybe $30, $40, that would be a very cool thing. Or maybe you have one of these things somewhere laying around, you can make an amazing emulation machine out of it. However, with a lot of limitations. If you just want to play some N64 all the way until there, we do have some options to actually have this awesome way to play and upscale some of these systems and still have an absolutely blast to the past. Besides that, it's absolutely great when it comes to playing these old school games. But let's do a little bit of a teardown further. So I must say that I do have a little bit of a doubt that this is even a brand Asus. I think the seller has just a massive brain fart that I sometimes have too. And there is nothing with Asus about. So this is just a non-generic one. If you can find it on AliExpress or some kind, I think it's going to be quite challenging because these things are quite old. Sometimes in your local shop or maybe on eBay you can find them. We can actually remove this. Oh man, I completely forgot the screw. We need to remove that one too. And here you can see we can remove the top part. And then the overall construction, I'm quite surprised. Oh, I had a brain fart. Me thinking that there's going to be a hard drive inside. It almost looked like a hard drive, but it is an SSD. So this is pre-installed with some Windows. I think it was 11 with this mini PC, but we're not going to be using this, let's say, SSD itself. Next up, we're going to be having two, let's say, memory modules, in total 16 gigabyte. That's going to be more than enough. So the construction, everything seems to be very clean. Let's look at this part. Ah, this is the A-Open. That is actually the brand of the mini PC enclosure. But what's interesting, you can just see that this removable CPU. Not that we're going to be doing that, but this is a possibility that is even upgradable. So that is quite unique. And in here, I think we even have the option for having an extra M2 or an SSD implemented. The battery can very easily removed. So the construction of this thing are open. Okay, that's nice. Okay, so this is a very cool, let's say, overall construction when it comes to, let's say, this product itself. Another thing I just think is quite interesting, that this PCB is actually connecting to the connector over here. So we're going to be connecting everything. So the overall construction is quite nice. But let's plug it back together. And what you can also do is remove the 2.5 drive or reflash it with Batocera. There are many different ways to go to with this. And if you just want to use only Batocera, maybe it's better to just remove it and just only use Batocera with this.